Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Inspire series, where we are discussing picture books. So, welcome, Sarah, Michelle, and Karen, our expert children's books writing panel. This week, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of rhyme versus prose or narrative, some call it. They both tell a story, but tell it in different ways. And there's lots of opinions out there about which is the best. So this is just an open conversation once again about, I particularly love rhyme. I'm not sure about anyone else. I love rhyme in the classroom over the narrative, but we have both and they both serve their purpose. So I have 5 questions from some members of my Daisy Lane page on Facebook who have generously asked some questions. So I thought we would go with those this week. So the first question, and for me, I think it's a really, really good one. How does rhyme help with language learning in the early years? Great topic, because language begins the day we're born. We hear it, we see it, we visualize it. Good question. So, Sarah, you're currently working in that area. Yeah. Start with you.
Yeah, rhyming is hugely important in the very early days, the early years, preschool, as we'd say here in the UK, because when a child hears rhyme through songs and reading, they're just becoming more aware of the sounds and how words are kind of segmented and syllables are formed and used. So they're taking in all this amazing language knowledge without realizing, and they're taking it all in at a really early stage. So that's why you'll see a lot of the early years books, the preschool books, the 3-year-old, 4-year-old books in the early days will be in rhyme as opposed to prose, just because it's a really good way for them to have these building blocks and start to just understand how their language is working.
Yeah. And Karen, your experience, you worked with a lot of
kindergarten.
Yeah,
I know when we programmed, we would target word families. So we might look at words for the week, and then we would target books that had them. So what it's doing is it's scaffolding their knowledge. So if they know at, then they can learn cat and fat and mat and bat. And then you can go into doubles, that, and then you can keep building it, and then you can look at it in the middle of words as well. So it empowers the child because it's a building block, and then they start and then they learn more. And when you see it in books that rhyme, they do the same thing. You'll have, and Dr. Seuss was the master of it. So, or even if you didn't know it, and you're a child, if you can get that first sound and you know the other bit, you just put it together and you've got it. So you're using what you know to work out what you don't know. And that's what rhyme helps you do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Karen. Michelle, you do a lot of author visits in schools. Do you see that happening in the classrooms you've been in?
Well, I've actually had personal experience of it myself, because I didn't write before I was in grade 5 at school, because I thought that I was actually not very good at English. And it wasn't until I had a primary school teacher, actually it was in grade 5 and then leading into grade 6, who said to me, Michelle, I don't understand, out on the playground you're basically making plays up in your head and you're telling these amazing stories and acting them out. But in the classroom, when it came to word work, you're doing very simple sentences and you're struggling to fill a whole page. And it was because at my old school, my writing would be full of red lines with spelling mistakes. And I thought that it meant I was bad at English. And it wasn't that I was bad at English. I'm just really bad at spelling. And so one of the ways that my teacher helped me was to get me into bush poetry. So I read a lot of Man from Snowy River and Banjo Paterson and Mulgaville's Bicycle, and I learned the rhythm and rhyme of language, and that helped me so much to be able to improve my spelling, but also give me the confidence to start writing poetry. And from writing poetry, that then led me into writing stories, and that was the journey for me to become an author. So I owe a lot to rhyming books and teachers who promote rhyming books.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Sarah, which do you prefer, rhyme, prose?
So I actually prefer prose for me personally, but I do sometimes put rhyme in there. For example, with the heavy bag, there is a rhyme which is in there, and that's more of a creative feature because that's a message that I want people to really kind of take from the book, but which is quite interesting because some publishers are a bit sort of unsure of that. So you've got to really kind of sell why you've put rhyme in a prose book for a message. However, for me, that was just a really good way for a child to be able to take away the message that the book's trying to give. But I definitely personally am much better with prose as opposed to rhyme. I actually envy authors who can just do the most amazing rhyme books.
Yes.
I would love to. They're really fun, and I've seen children the other side just become so excitable when they've got a rhyming book and they're listening to patterns, and it's something that I'd like to look into more actually.
Yeah, okay. And Karen?
I wrote in prose, but as a teacher, I loved both and made sure there was always both, but it was always about the story for me. It didn't matter whether it was rhyme or prose, but I leaned towards prose. And like Sarah and probably Michelle, I will weave a bit, maybe unknowingly, I might put a little bit in, but I'm not trying to rhyme, because if you don't know how to do it well, and I've heard publishers say this, and I believe it too, they say you shouldn't do it at all. And I even had an experience with that recently. I'm in a critique group, and sometimes when I'm having fun, I might chuck it in. And one of the critique, I only chucked in this rhyme in one bit, and they said, oh, that looks a bit forced or a bit clunky. And I think when you're not a master at it, that's what it can feel like. And then if you don't feel confident, it shows. And also if you're trying to force the rhyme when you're writing, it stands out here.
Yeah. That's where it gets a bit clunky, I think.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. Yeah. Okay. Great thoughts there, ladies. And moving on to the second question. Why do traditional publishers appear to prefer prose over rhyme? And I think we've just touched on it a little bit there. Yeah. So, Michelle.
I think exactly what my esteemed colleagues have already said. When rhyme's bad, it's really bad. Yeah. And it's very hard to write rhyme very well, because what makes sense in your head might not be the same when someone else is reading it out loud. So if you are writing in rhyme, and I know people who write in rhyme extremely well, like Adam Wallace, he is a master. Yeah. He is like, seriously, if you want to know how to write picture books that rhyme really well, just talk to Adam and get his book. So it's very hard to do it well. And the other thing, which I think we're going to talk about a bit later, is that when we do things like international rights, it's very hard to translate a picture book into a different language. So that's a deterrent for some larger publishers.
Yeah. So do you agree with that with traditional publishers, Karen?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I've heard the same thing. I've been, when you start out, and I'm still only emerging writer, you go to conferences and things, and the rhyme question's always raised because there are so many people that are passionate and love it and do it so well that it's always raised. And it has been, like what Michelle has said, the translation's too difficult. And also I find too, you can't copy a master. If you're not a Dr. Seuss and you're just trying to mimic a Dr. Seuss at shows, you've got to be who you are as a rhymer and not try and be like someone else who rhymes. And that's hard too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Sarah, do you find in the UK traditional publishers are similar to over here? They tend to err away from rhyming books?
I mean, in my experience, I think what we've said here is definitely the same here in the UK as it is in Australia. You know, if you can't do rhyme well, don't do it. Don't push it, don't force it, because as much as we love as teachers and readers and writers the other side, picking up a rhyming book with a child, I also just as much enjoy picking up a really good storybook. And I think that's the thing. I think if you write in prose for children, stick to it, because as soon as you start to try and force rhyme, you're taking yourself away from your story inevitably, because you're trying to find these rhyming words and these endings and this rhythm, and it's kind of taking you away from where you want to be originally with the story, and you'll end up with a very different story, and that would be an absolute shame. So I think definitely stick to what you're good at. There's absolutely no harm in learning. Like I say, I'd love to learn, you know, how to rhyme a bit better, and that comes with practice rather than being able to force it. And you just want to sort of stick to your story. As long as there's a good storyline there, that's what traditional publishers are looking for.
Yeah, and I think it always comes back to the storyline, doesn't it? It doesn't matter how it's written. Yeah. Okay. The third question. Can't read my writing. And I think we've actually answered that. Yep, the third question, is it more difficult to write in rhyme? I think we've answered that one really well. Yeah, okay. So we'll leave that one go. That one's been answered. The fourth question, really interesting question. Will rhyme continue to be written in the age of AI, you know, the dreaded AI, artificial intelligences, and how will this work if it is? Will it work for all books? Is it a concern? So yeah, who'd like to go first? It's a biggie. Yeah. Sarah, should we go first?
Yeah. So I was looking into this, because when I heard this question, I thought, oh wow, gosh, do you know, I hadn't actually thought about that. And I was looking into it, and there are actually a few AI tools around already for poetry. So obviously, you know, rhyme is very specific, and there is poetry. And I thought, gosh, that could probably eventually move on to rhyme. But I personally couldn't see it taken over, because as authors, we know how important our relationship is with the book and with the audience, and that's what publishers want. And publishers want the person behind the book out there, because we do so much in the community and with schools and with education and talks and groups and things like this. So it wouldn't just be about having, you know, an AI tool to write the rhyme, because that's really where it would stop. That there would be no discussion like this. There would be no school visits, no teaching. Yeah. So I personally don't see that it would take over. Sure, it's going to be there. And I think, you know, some people use it. There's something called verse by verse, which is out already. But I don't think it would take over from this. It can't, I don't think.
Yeah. Michelle, do you agree? Disagree?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing a lot of research into AI and how it's going to change the future of writing and publishing. even to the point where I was speaking to somebody last week about a potential job, and they said, why should I pay you when I can use an app to do exactly the same thing? So it's absolutely going to impact us as authors. I mean, my first picture book was a rhyming picture book, and it was based on a poem that I wrote when I was in grade 5, when I was just starting out. And you can't replicate that kind of thing in AI. When I go to an author visit, exactly like you're saying, I'm showing them this picture book and saying to a grade 5 class, this is based on a poem that I wrote when I was in grade 5. And that's the sort of impact and influence and inspiration that you're not going to be able to get with something that's produced on AI. But in saying that, it's a business, publishing is a business. So there definitely is going to be instances where books are going to be created, written and illustrated in AI. But how that works is it draws from content that's already existing on the internet. So it's drawing from a lot of sources, and it's just kind of pulling them together in a random jumble. And even something as generic as ChatGPT, you can say to that, write a 500-word poem for children on dogs, and it will write that for you. And then you can go into another app and say, produce 12 different pictures about these things, and you can upload that to Ingram Spark and put your name on it. So, I mean, I think it's definitely going to happen. And I had a big fight online with somebody who was actually promoting that and saying, you know, this is a really good way for you to make income. Just do this on ChatGPT and upload it. And they used this picture book as an example of somebody who had done really well. And it was a traditionally published picture book from like 20 years ago, and they're using it. So there's people out there who are going to, I think, try and profit off this. But what we need to do as authors is just remember what we have to offer, and that the craft of writing is something that is human. And absolutely, we've got lots of tools at our disposal, but I don't think, especially when we write for kids, that can be replaced.
Yeah, and I think you really touched on a really good point there. We are humans and kids are humans. There's a massive difference. I've seen work produced by AI. I've actually had a manuscript sent to me, and the person openly, just in this last week, said to me they used ChatGPT,
yeah,
to help in inverted commas. And it was so obvious. There was nothing human about it at all. So I just threw it back and said, hey, thank you for submitting, but no thanks. Because for me, just as a person, it was just wrong. As a writer, as a teacher, as a grandmother, it was just wrong, and so yeah, Karen, do you agree with all that?
I think you've really nailed it, you girls. And I also think what's clever about the AI is they can use the computer to analyse the language used in a way that we can't, well, I wouldn't be able to do. And they pick the patterns, and it's very methodical and targeted. But in saying that, I'm interested to see where it goes, because even, I don't know if you go out, when you go out for dinner, they have electronic robots in some restaurants and they deliver the meals. And I just laughed because our Thai, down the road got one, and they, we thought, oh, look at this cool thing going around. But they forgot there's a little lip for where it goes out onto the veranda. So the robot doesn't work in their restaurant. It just sits in the corner. So I'm like, I wonder, you don't know what's going to happen with this. But I just think there's always hope. as a writer, and I know that when it comes from innate and it comes with meaning and passion, that comes out in words. And I don't know if AI can do that. But if you look at what went on with the pandemic, picture book sales went up in a lot of places. Book sales went up. And so people wanted that connection, and they wanted that love of the book from what someone had created. They could have just done electronic stuff all the time, but they were looking for the books.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the girl you all raised too about the backstory with the author, we all have a story, how we got to write and why we write. And there's more to a story than just the story, like Michelle said.
Yeah. And that is, another nugget that you've said there, that is just as important as the story itself.
Yeah.
Because when you read a story, you want to know more. You don't want, you just don't just want to know about the story. You want to know about the person behind the story. Yeah.
Why it was created.
Yeah. That's what the children ask when you go for an author visit. I don't know about you guys, but the most, popular questions are always, they look at you and they say, when did you first know you were a writer? Why did you start writing? What inspired you? Children need that. I mean, Karen, you just said it's that connection, it's that human connection. And I think we need to give children, the readers, a lot more credit for what they get out of the books and the authors behind it, because they want to know that backstory. So yeah, interesting. I'm gonna watch it from afar.
Yeah. Oh, it will be interesting to see where it goes. I think I agree with all of you, and
yeah,
I
there will
don't
be a
particularly
place.
like it, but there is scope for it in some. Yeah. But for me, it's just not going to work in picture books. It's just not going to happen for me. Yeah. Okay. And our last question. And this is another really, really tricky one too, that we've touched on it just a little bit. How difficult is it to translate rhyme into other languages? And is this why traditional publishers don't like doing it? The translation. Yeah. So, Sarah, you've had a lot of books. You are getting your book, The Heavy Bag, translated into a lot of different languages at the moment. Do you think that would have happened if it wasn't rhyme?
Well, so interestingly, as I said before, the Heavy Bag is in prose, and there is that one section, that one message that is in rhyme, and it has been translated into about 15 languages now. And when a book is translated, it's not just obviously the words, it is, the adaptation, so it fits in that culture. There's lots of other things that are going on, and I have to say it is quite hard for them to translate the rhyme. For me, it's not so much about that segment of rhyme, it's the metaphor that they're translating. It's the metaphor of carrying heavy feelings, a heavy load. So they've been able to translate that metaphor as opposed to the actual rhymes. That's quite hard. And then the rest of the book is in prose. So and they've communicated really well with me, Arabic or Icelandic or Chinese or wherever, about the process that they've gone through. I do think that if the whole of the book had been in rhyme, that would have been very hard, and it probably wouldn't have been acquired as much with foreign publishers.
Yeah, would have been that much more trickier to get the message conveyed. Yeah. Do you agree with that, Michelle?
I do. And the other thing as well is I don't want it to stop people submitting in rhyme. If you've got an amazing rhyming manuscript, you just need to be smart about who you're submitting it to. So find a publisher who doesn't sell internet, like who doesn't do the international rights or doesn't have international distribution. In Australia, there's quite a few of those. Even in the UK and the US, there are still publishers who accept rhyming manuscripts, but most of the time now they will actually tell you if they do or if they don't. So I think you just need to be smart about who you're sending it to reduce the amount of rejection that you're going to get, because I know there's some publishers who just do not accept rhyme at all. But doing it in rhyme, if the story calls for rhyme, it would be silly to change it to prose just to get published. I think it would make more sense that you be selective about who you send it to than give up on it altogether.
Yeah, and it is a calling, isn't it? It's that inner knowing, isn't it, of what and how you're going to write a story. Karen, your take on it?
Michelle just said what I was going to say. Great minds think alike.
I know we do.
But there are publishers that do accept rhyme, and there are some that only want rhyme. And if you need to learn about what your writing style is, and then you need to look for where your writing will fit. So if you're a person who writes in prose, you'll look for publishers who are more open and receptive to those sort of stories. And then if you write in rhyme, of course you should write in rhyme if that's your passion, because I know when I write, it's a story that calls, and if it's calling you, you just got to do it. It doesn't matter whether it's rhyme or prose, you're just going to do it. And then you'll work on it, and you can't. And I think with rhyme, you can't rush it either, because there's nothing worse than sending it in if it's got holes, or or it jars, or it's not quite right. But there'll always be a place for rhyme, always, and prose, both.
And I think the important thing is that if it is picked up for translation, don't lose the story when it is being translated. That's, if that happens, then it's not what it was, and it's not what it should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You lose the whole concept of what it was. So there's no point. So, yeah, if you write in rhyme or you write in prose, it's the story that matters, and keeping that story is what's really important. Yeah. So, okay, that's the end of our questions, ladies. Rhyme versus prose. It's, go with what you know, go with what you want to do, go with what you feel. No right or wrong.
No.
Yeah. So,
Not a bad
conversation once again, ladies. A lot of gold nuggets there that I'm sure people will appreciate from all the different aspects that we talked about. Next week, we won't be seeing you, Michelle. We'll be just for the week. But we do have a special guest who will be taking your place just for next week, Hero who is a Finnish global influencer in the education world. She will have a lot to say about our topic next week, which is how do picture books help develop children's literacy and language skills, verbal and written, and their understanding of text in the social sphere. So that's a big one next week. So if anyone who is out there watching, listening, if you have any questions for us once again, please let us know so we can answer them, try and answer them like we did tonight. So thank you, ladies, once again for your time. Great conversation, and I look forward to next week. I'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.